You keep waking up at 3 a.m., and it's not random, because right now, something is happening inside your brain that you were never meant to notice. It's quiet, it's subtle, and it only shows up when the world goes dark. It's the reason your eyes suddenly open without warning. It's the reason your body feels heavy, but your mind feels wide awake. And once it starts, it's almost impossible to ignore. Your thoughts begin to move faster than they should that hour. Memories, worries, random ideas start surfacing out of nowhere. Your brain starts scanning, analyzing, replaying things that didn't matter all day. And no matter how exhausted you feel, something keeps you from dropping back into sleep. You try to relax, you shift positions, you close your eyes tighter, but your system is no longer in sleep mode the way it was before, and that's why you can't fall back asleep the same way again. Not fully, not deeply, not in a way that lets you truly sleep through the night. And what makes this even more confusing is that it doesn't feel like typical insomnia because your body is tired, but your brain refuses to shut off, which means what's happening here isn't just about sleep. And in a moment, you'll see exactly why your brain does this at 3 a.m. I'm Dr. Sarah, a sleep medicine specialist with a background in psychiatry, and over the years, I've worked with thousands of individuals struggling with sleep disruptions. Many of them are over 40, and they come in feeling confused, frustrated, and exhausted. They've tried routines, supplements, and every piece of advice they could find, but nothing seems to help them stay asleep all night. And what they experience follows a very specific pattern, a pattern that most people completely misunderstand. They fall asleep without much difficulty at the beginning of the night, but then, almost like clockwork, they wake up at 3 a.m. Their eyes open suddenly without any clear external reason, and within seconds, their mind becomes active again. Not calm thoughts, but rapid, uncontrollable mental activity, the kind that makes it impossible to drift back into sleep. And that's where the real frustration begins. Because in that moment, their body still feels tired, their muscles are heavy, their eyes want to close again, but their brain feels like it just turned back on. And no matter how hard they try to relax, something feels off. They lie there, waiting, hoping sleep will return naturally, but instead, they remain stuck in a half-awake state, a state that never fully becomes restful again. Over time, this starts to affect how they feel during the day. They wake up tired, even after spending hours in bed. Their focus drops, their energy feels unstable, and there's often a quiet sense of mental fatigue that doesn't go away. Some even begin to feel anxious about going to sleep, not because they can't fall asleep, but because they know what might happen later in the night. And almost all of them arrive with the same belief. They think something is wrong with their sleep system. They believe they might have insomnia, or that their brain is somehow malfunctioning at night. Some even blame stress, lifestyle, or age alone. But none of those explanations fully connect the pattern, because the real cause operates at a deeper level. And once they begin to understand what's actually happening inside the brain, everything starts to shift in how they see their nights. Because this isn't random, and it isn't a personal failure. It's a specific biological response that follows a hidden logic, a mechanism that explains why the brain won't shut off at night, why you wake up at 3 a.m. and can't fall back asleep the same way again. And in the next part, you'll start to recognize this pattern in yourself even more clearly. You feel exhausted during the day, not just a little tired, but mentally drained in a way that doesn't make sense. Your body feels heavy, your focus slips, and even simple tasks take more effort. You try to push through, telling yourself you just need better sleep tonight, but deep down, you already know how the night is going to unfold, because this pattern has repeated itself more times than you can count, and it never fully resolves on its own. When night comes, things don't feel as calm as they should. Your body lies down, but it doesn't completely let go. There's a subtle tension that stays in the background. Your breathing may slow, but your system never fully powers down. It's like your brain is still monitoring something, still scanning, still aware, even in the quiet. And that underlying alertness changes everything. Your thoughts don't stop, they just change form. They become quieter, but more persistent, looping in the background without a clear endpoint. Small things start to feel more important than they should. Unfinished conversations, future concerns, random details. Things that had no weight during the day suddenly feel amplified, and your brain keeps revisiting them without resolution. Then, at some point in the night, you wake up. Not gradually, but almost like a switch was flipped. Your eyes open, and within seconds, your mind is active again. There's no grogginess, no slow transition, just awareness. And with that awareness comes a flood of mental activity. You start analyzing, remembering, thinking in fast loops, as if your brain has fully re-engaged without your permission. You try to go back to sleep the way you did earlier. You close your eyes and wait for that same feeling to return. But something is different now. Your body is still tired, but your mind won't follow. It stays alert, slightly elevated, just enough to keep you awake. And the more you notice it, the more it becomes present, making it harder to slip back into real sleep. So you stay there in between states, not fully awake, but not truly asleep either. Time passes, but it doesn't feel restorative. Your brain keeps running in the background the entire time, and when morning comes, you feel like you never fully rested, like your sleep was interrupted at a deeper level. And what's actually causing that interruption is something most people never see. Most people believe this is going to take months to fix. They assume once your sleep is broken, it stays that way, that insomnia becomes something you have to manage long term. So they lower their expectations and try to cope with fatigue. They adjust routines, accept fatigue, and push through the days. But that belief is built on an incomplete understanding of sleep, and that's where everything starts to go in the wrong direction. Because sleep science shows something very different. It shows that this pattern isn't fixed or permanent. It's not something your brain is locked into forever. In fact, in many cases, it can begin shifting much faster than expected, sometimes in just a few nights of the right conditions. Not because your sleep is being forced or controlled, but because a specific trigger inside the brain begins to change. And that's the part most people never realize. There is a trigger behind why you wake up at 3 a.m., a trigger behind why your brain won't shut off at night, a trigger behind why you can't fall back asleep the same way again. And as long as that trigger keeps activating, your brain will keep repeating the same pattern, no matter how tired you feel. This is why traditional approaches often fall short. They focus on symptoms instead of what's driving them. They try to calm the mind without understanding why it's active. They try to improve sleep without addressing what interrupts it. So even when something seems to help temporarily, the pattern eventually comes back because the root mechanism is still running underneath. But once that mechanism stops being triggered, the brain doesn't need to stay in that state anymore. It naturally begins to shift out of it. Not instantly, but predictably. And when that shift starts to happen, sleep begins to feel different again. Deeper, more stable, more continuous. So the real question isn't how to force yourself to sleep, and it's not how to shut your thoughts down at night. The real question is what exactly is triggering your brain at 3 a.m.? What is causing it to switch back on so precisely, and why it keeps happening even when nothing seems wrong? Because once you see that clearly, the entire pattern starts to make sense in a completely different way. The problem isn't that you can't fall asleep, and it's not that your brain is somehow broken, because if you were truly unable to sleep, you wouldn't fall asleep at all. But you do fall asleep, sometimes quickly, sometimes without effort, which means your sleep system is still working, at least in the first phase of the night. And that changes where the real problem actually is. And it's also not that your brain won't shut off, because the brain is never designed to fully shut off. Even in deep sleep, it remains active and responsive, monitoring your body, regulating internal balance, staying alert in the background. So trying to turn off your brain is not the solution. In fact, that idea can make the problem worse because it targets the wrong mechanism entirely. The real problem is something much more specific. Your brain is entering a state where it refuses to stay asleep, not at the beginning of the night, but in the middle of it, right around the time your sleep should be at its deepest. Instead of maintaining that depth, your brain starts pulling you out, gradually shifting you into a lighter, more fragile state. And once that shift begins, the rest becomes inevitable. At a deeper level, your brain is constantly evaluating safety, not just external danger, but internal biological signals, things like cortisol levels, nervous system activity, and rhythm stability. And when something feels even slightly misaligned, your brain interprets that as a potential risk, not a conscious decision, but an automatic response designed to keep you protected without you realizing it. So instead of allowing deep, uninterrupted sleep, your brain reduces the depth of your sleep cycle. It keeps you closer to wakefulness, just in case. And that's why you become easier to wake at 3 a.m. That's why your awareness returns so quickly. And that's why your mind activates almost instantly, because you were never fully deep asleep anymore. And when that protective shift fully activates, your brain prepares you to re-engage with the environment, even if there's no real danger present. It increases alertness just enough to bring you back online. And that's when your eyes open and your thoughts start racing, not randomly, but as part of a deeper biological pattern. A pattern driven by something your brain is doing automatically every night. This state has a name in sleep science, and once you hear it, everything starts to connect. It's called the Neural Sleep Inhibition Response, a built-in mechanism designed to regulate how deeply you sleep. Not something rare or abnormal, but something that activates under very specific conditions most people don't even realize are happening. The neural sleep inhibition response is not a disorder. It's a natural function of the brain. Its role is to keep you from going too deep into sleep when something feels off, almost like a safety layer that stays partially active at night. It monitors internal signals continuously and adjusts your sleep depth based on what it detects, all without your conscious awareness. When this response activates, your nervous system doesn't fully power down. It stays slightly elevated beneath the surface. Your body may appear relaxed, but internally it's still on alert. Subtle increases in cortisol begin to occur, not enough to fully wake you immediately, but enough to prevent stable deep sleep. And that's where the disruption begins. At the same time, your circadian rhythm becomes slightly misaligned. The timing of your internal signals shifts just enough, creating a window where your brain becomes more sensitive, more reactive to even minor internal changes. And this combination pushes your system into what we call brain alert mode, a state where sleep and wakefulness start to overlap instead of remaining clearly separated. Once your brain enters brain alert mode, your sleep becomes unstable. It's no longer deep and continuous. It becomes lighter, easier to interrupt, and that's why you wake up at 3 a.m. so often. Your brain is already closer to the surface of wakefulness, so it doesn't take much to bring you fully awake. And when that happens, your mind reactivates almost instantly. You start thinking, analyzing, replaying things again. Your thoughts move faster than they should at that hour. And even though your body is still tired, you can't fall asleep the same way you did before because the neural sleep inhibition response is still active, keeping your system in a protective, semi-alert state. Not because something is wrong with you, but because your brain believes it's necessary. Imagine your brain like a night security system, always running in the background, even when you're asleep. Its job is not just to help you rest, but to protect you, to monitor changes, detect patterns, and respond when needed. And when everything feels stable, it stays quiet, allowing your body to move into deeper stages of sleep without interruption or resistance. When that system feels safe, everything flows naturally. Your breathing slows, your muscles fully relax, your brain transitions smoothly into deep sleep cycles. You stay asleep without sudden awakenings, your body repairs, your mind resets, your energy restores, and you wake up feeling like you actually rested, because nothing interfered with that process overnight. But after 40, something begins to change, not dramatically, but enough to affect how this system behaves. The brain becomes more sensitive to internal signals, more reactive to subtle shifts in your body. Things that never affected your sleep before start to matter, even if you don't consciously notice them. And this is where the pattern starts to shift. Cortisol rhythms begin to change with age. They can rise earlier or fluctuate more easily at night. The nervous system becomes slightly more reactive, meaning it doesn't take as much to trigger alertness, and your circadian rhythm becomes easier to disrupt. Even small inconsistencies can throw off its timing, creating windows of instability during the night. So now, even minor internal signals can activate a response. A small spike in cortisol, a subtle shift in rhythm, or a slight increase in nervous system activity. Things that would have been ignored years ago now become enough to trigger the Neural Sleep Inhibition Response. And once that response is activated, your sleep is no longer fully protected. Because the moment that system detects something off, it switches your brain into a more alert state. Not fully awake, but no longer deeply asleep. Right in the middle of the night, often around 3 a.m., your awareness rises. Your mind begins to engage, even though there is no real danger present. And that's when the cycle you've been experiencing begins again. Over time, this doesn't just happen once in a while. It begins to repeat itself night after night. At first, it feels occasional and unpredictable, but slowly it becomes a pattern your brain recognizes, a pattern that starts to feel familiar to your system. And once that familiarity sets in, it becomes harder to break, because your brain starts adapting to it. You wake up at 3 a.m. more consistently, not always at the exact same minute, but close enough. Your eyes open and your awareness returns quickly. Your body feels tired, but your mind is already active. And without realizing it, you begin expecting it to happen. Even before you go to sleep, there's a subtle anticipation, a quiet thought in the background that it might happen again. When you try to fall back asleep, it feels different now, not like the first time you drifted off earlier in the night. Your brain doesn't let go the same way. It stays slightly engaged, slightly alert. Your thoughts start forming more easily, and the more you notice that, the harder it becomes to relax, because awareness itself keeps the system active. As this continues, your sleep becomes lighter overall. Even the hours before 3 a.m. don't feel as deep anymore. Your brain starts maintaining a lower threshold for waking, meaning it takes less to bring you out of sleep. And your mind begins racing more often at night. Not always intensely, but enough to disrupt your rest, enough to prevent full recovery by morning. Eventually, your brain begins to expect this cycle. It prepares for that 3 a.m. window before it even happens. Your internal systems start aligning with that pattern, almost like it's anticipating the interruption. And that expectation reinforces the behavior, making it even harder to sleep through the night, even on nights when nothing feels wrong. But here's the part most people never get told. This pattern is not permanent or fixed. Your brain is not locked into this response forever. It learned this pattern, which means it can unlearn it. It can return to a state where night feels safe again, where deep sleep is allowed to continue without interruption. And what allows that shift to happen is something most people have never been shown. The solution isn't forcing yourself to sleep, and it's not about trying to overpower your brain at night. Because the more you try to force sleep, the more resistance you create. Sleep doesn't respond well to pressure or control. It responds to conditions that allow it to happen naturally. And that's where most approaches go wrong. They focus on control instead of cooperation with the brain. It's also not about sedating your system or shutting down your thoughts artificially, because that doesn't resolve what's actually causing the awakenings. It may temporarily dull the experience, but the underlying pattern remains active, waiting to show up again the next night, because the root mechanism was never addressed. The real shift begins when you reduce the neural sleep inhibition response, not by fighting it, but by making it unnecessary, by helping your brain feel safe enough to stay asleep, so it no longer needs to activate that protective state. And when that happens, everything starts to change. Your sleep becomes deeper without being forced, more stable without constant interruptions. This happens by supporting specific biological processes, stabilizing cortisol levels during the night so they don't spike at the wrong time, calming and regulating the nervous system so it doesn't stay partially alert in the background, restoring the natural sleep switch your brain depends on, and realigning your circadian rhythm with its natural timing. That's why many sleep specialists now recommend gentle, natural forms of support that work with your biology instead of trying to override it or suppress it. Approaches that help the brain return to balance, rather than forcing it into sleep artificially. Because when the brain feels safe again, sleep follows, without struggle, without resistance, without pressure. There is a doctor-approved option designed to support this process. It's formulated to work alongside your natural sleep biology, not as a quick fix or overnight solution, but as a way to support what your brain is already trying to do. You can find it in the first pinned comment below. And once you understand how this support fits into the bigger picture, the final piece of this pattern becomes much clearer. So if you keep waking up at 3 a.m. and it keeps happening in the same frustrating way, there's a reason your nights feel broken in the middle, a reason your mind suddenly turns back on, a reason your sleep doesn't feel continuous anymore. And it's not just something random or unpredictable. It's something your brain is actively doing. If your brain won't shut off at night, if your thoughts start racing the moment you wake up, if you can't fall asleep the same way again, and your sleep feels lighter after that point, this pattern is not just in your head. It's not a lack of discipline or relaxation. It's a biological response that's still active. And that's why you never feel fully rested, because your sleep is being interrupted at a deeper level, not just in duration, but in quality and depth. Your body stays in a partially alert state, even when you're technically asleep, preventing full recovery from happening overnight, and carrying that fatigue into the next day. This is why it's likely not insomnia in the traditional sense, because you can fall asleep at the beginning of the night, but something interrupts your ability to stay asleep, something that activates without your awareness, something your brain believes is necessary, even when there's no real danger present. And that something has a name. It's called the Neural Sleep Inhibition Response, a protective mechanism that keeps your system alert at night, that raises your internal awareness at specific times, and that pulls you out of deep sleep too early. But the moment this response begins to change, your sleep begins to change with it, not by force, but by allowing your brain to let go again. But there's one critical piece we haven't explored yet: why this response activates so consistently at the same time, why so many people wake up between 3 and 3:30 a.m., what's happening in your body during that exact window, and how cortisol timing is directly connected to it. Because once you see that connection clearly, you'll understand exactly what your brain has been doing every night.